In the early 1900s, over 100,000 Filipinos crossed the Pacific to work Hawaii's sugar plantations. The days were brutal, the pay was pennies, but the food? That's where hope lived. From adobo bubbling in tin pots to pancit noodles stretched to feed a whole camp, these dishes weren't just meals, they were survival, pride, and a taste of home in a foreign land. Many of these humble foods quietly reshaped Hawaii's table forever. Some vanished with time, others became island staples, and a few hold secrets most people have never heard. Today, we're uncovering 25 Filipino plantation foods that tell the story of hardship, resilience, and flavor that still lingers in Hawaii to this day. Stick around, because the last dish on this list might just shock you. 1. Rice and pork guisantes. On the plantations, dinner had to do more than fill stomachs. It had to lift spirits. One dish that did exactly that was rice and pork guisantes. Imagine tender pork simmered in a tomato-based sauce, brightened with green peas, then spooned over steaming white rice. It wasn't fancy, but it looked and tasted like celebration on a plate. The ingredients tell the story. Pork scraps and bones, often the cheapest cuts, were simmered until soft. Canned peas and tomatoes were easy to stock in plantation stores, and of course, rice was the backbone of every Filipino table. Together, they turned humble rations into something comforting and familiar. After 12 hours in the cane fields, workers would gather, bowls in hand, letting the smell of garlic and tomato drift through the camps. Each bite carried memories of fiestas back home, even thousands of miles away. Over time, the recipe moved beyond the plantation kitchens, appearing at neighborhood potlucks and family celebrations. Generations later, it still graces local tables, a gentle reminder of the grit and heart that built Hawaii's food traditions. And slowly, this dish stitched Filipino flavors into Hawaii's growing food culture. 2. Adobo chicken and rice. If there was one dish that defined the Filipino table on Hawaii's plantations, it was adobo chicken and rice. Vinegar, garlic, soy, and peppercorns simmered down with chicken until the meat was tender, the sauce tangy and savory, and the aroma unforgettable. Served over hot rice, it was the kind of food that could turn exhaustion into relief. Adobo was more than flavor. It was survival. Vinegar and garlic preserved the meat in the days before refrigeration, making it safe to eat even after hours in the fields. A pot of adobo could be stretched across several meals, feeding families and bunkmates alike. In the evenings, the sharp smell of vinegar and garlic cooking would drift from hut to hut, drawing workers to the table. Every bite reminded them of home, of mothers and fiestas in the Philippines, even as they built new lives in Hawaii. Adobo didn't just survive in the camps. It thrived, becoming one of Hawaii's most beloved comfort foods. 3. Simmered. Now here's a dish born right on the plantations themselves. Simmered. Picture a steaming bowl of noodles in light broth, topped with whatever scraps were on hand, maybe green onions, a bit of fish cake, or slices of leftover pork. It was simple, filling, and cheap. But more than that, it was fusion. Filipino workers brought their own taste for noodles, mixing with Japanese ramen, Chinese mein, and even Hawaiian touches. On the plantations, these cultures blended in the kitchens just as they did in the fields. A shared pot of semen was comfort for everyone, no matter where they came from. For weary laborers, that hot broth warmed tired bones after hours of cutting cane. The noodles stretched a meal further, making sure no one went hungry. Over time, simmered grew from camp kitchens into a statewide favorite, sold in diners and drive-ins across Hawaii. What started as survival food became one of the island's most iconic bowls. Today, it remains a beloved taste of Hawaii's multicultural roots, a humble dish that tells the story of many peoples in every bite. 4. Lumpia. If adobo was the heart of plantation meals, lumpia was the celebration. Imagine golden, crispy rolls stuffed with pork, vegetables, or even just cabbage and onions when money was tight. Fried until crunchy and dipped in sharp vinegar, lumpia turned an ordinary evening into something that felt special. On the plantations, workers often shared lumpia during gatherings, birthdays, or payday feasts. Families would roll them in big batches, kids helping to fold the thin wrappers while adults fried them over open flames. The sizzling sound drew neighbors over, and soon the table became a circle of laughter and stories. What made lumpia so loved was its flexibility. Whatever scraps or vegetables were left from the week found their way inside. Nothing was wasted, and yet the result always felt like a treat. Even today, lumpia carries that same magic, a finger food that brings people together, just like it did in the plantation camps over a century ago. One crunchy bite still delivers that same feeling of shared joy and family warmth, no matter where you eat it. 5. Fried rice with garlic and bits of pork or fish. On the plantations, nothing went to waste, and fried rice was the proof. Leftover rice from the day before got tossed into a hot pan with garlic, soy sauce, and whatever bits of pork or dried fish were lying around. The result? A fragrant, filling meal that could stretch just a handful of ingredients into something that fed an entire family. This wasn't just about saving money. Fried rice was comfort. The smoky garlic filling the camp kitchens, the sizzling sound of rice hitting oil, the joy of finding a salty piece of pork or fish hidden in the grains. For tired workers, it was the kind of dish that made you slow down, savor, and feel full after a day of hard labor. And here's the kicker. Fried rice became more than a Filipino staple. It blended with Chinese and Hawaiian versions, evolving into a dish you'll still find across the islands today, from plantation tables to local plate lunches. Each pan told a story of resourcefulness and shared flavors, turning simple leftovers into a taste of community and resilience. 6. Boiled rice and stewed vegetables in fish sauce. Sometimes the simplest meals carried the deepest comfort. On the plantations, boiled rice with stewed vegetables in fish sauce was about as humble as it gets, yet it was a lifeline. Imagine a pot filled with leafy greens, squash, or long beans simmered slowly, seasoned with bagoong or patis, that unmistakable salty punch of fish sauce. Ladled over rice, it turned scraps from the fields into a warm, nourishing meal. For many families, meat was rare and expensive, but vegetables were easier to come by. Workers grew small gardens near their camps or traded produce with neighbors. The magic was in the seasoning. A splash of fish sauce transformed plain greens into something hearty and familiar. After a long day in the fields, this simple bowl reminded them of the Philippines, where vegetables were always stretched with rice to feed many mouths. In Hawaii, it kept spirits strong and bellies full, proving survival didn't need luxury, just flavor. Even today, similar vegetable stews remain a quiet favorite in island kitchens, carrying forward the taste of thrift and home. 7. Fried fish with vinegar dip. Few smells could stop tired plantation workers in their tracks, like the crackle of fried fish in hot oil. Simple, quick, and flavorful, it was one of the most common meals on the camps. Small fish, often mackerel, sardines, or whatever could be caught or bought cheap, were salted, fried crisp, and served alongside plain rice. But the magic was in the dip. Sharp vinegar, sometimes spiked with garlic or chili, cutting right through the richness of the fried skin. For Filipinos, this meal felt like home. Back in the islands, fried fish was a daily staple, and on Hawaii's plantations, it became a taste of familiarity in an unfamiliar land. The crisp crack of each bite, paired with the tang of vinegar, was enough to make even the most modest supper feel satisfying. It wasn't just food, it was memory. In the camps, the scent of fried fish carried across shacks, a reminder that even far from home, traditions could still live at the dinner table. 8. Siopao or manapua. On Sundays or payday, plantation workers sometimes treated themselves to something special. Siopao, known locally as manapua. Picture a soft, pillowy white bun, still steaming as you tear it open, revealing sweet savory pork or chicken inside. It was portable, filling, and felt almost like street food from back home. These buns carried stories across cultures. Chinese immigrants brought the tradition, Filipinos embraced it, and soon plantation camps were filled with vendors carrying baskets of manapua, selling them hot and fresh. For a few cents, a worker could bite into something warm, sweet, and hearty enough to count as a meal. What made siopao beloved was its balance: bread to fill the stomach, meat for protein, and that hint of sweetness to remind weary workers of comfort. Kids adored them, adults relied on them, and slowly manapua became part of Hawaii's food identity. Even today, you can find them in bakeries across the islands, still carrying the taste of plantation days. 9. Arroz caldo. When sickness or exhaustion hit the camps, nothing healed quite like a bowl of arroz caldo. This Filipino rice porridge, simmered with chicken, garlic, ginger, and sometimes a squeeze of calamansi, was comfort in its purest form. Thick, steaming, and fragrant, it wrapped tired workers in warmth after long days under the Hawaiian sun. Rice was always the base, stretched with water into a hearty porridge. A few scraps of chicken could flavor an entire pot, feeding several hungry mouths. The ginger soothed the body, garlic added strength, and every spoonful felt like medicine you could taste. Families often served arroz caldo during the colder plantation nights or when children were unwell. In those moments, it wasn't just food, it was care. Workers far from their parents or grandparents found comfort in a dish that reminded them of being nurtured back home. Even today, arroz caldo is still cooked in Hawaii, carrying that same spirit of healing across generations. Each pot tells a story of resilience and love, proving that simple ingredients can offer powerful comfort and strength. 10. Boiled sweet potato and salted fish flakes. Not every meal on the plantations was hearty or meaty. Sometimes survival meant going back to the basics, like boiled sweet potato with salted fish flakes. Workers would cook sweet potatoes until soft and tender, then top them with shreds of dried salted fish. It was cheap, filling, and easy to prepare after a long day in the fields. Sweet potatoes grew well in Hawaii's soil, making them a reliable staple when rice was scarce or too expensive. Paired with dried fish, it gave just enough protein and salt to balance the natural sweetness of the tuber. It wasn't fancy, but it fueled weary bodies and reminded Filipinos of similar meals back home. In the camps, this dish carried a sense of resilience. It showed how plantation workers could take the humblest ingredients and turn them into something sustaining. Even in hardship, the mix of sweet and salty brought a kind of comfort, proof that simple food could still carry dignity. 11. Fish and vegetable soup. On the plantations, nothing warmed the body after a long day like a simple fish and vegetable soup. Made with small local fish, simmered alongside leafy greens, onions, or squash, it was light yet nourishing. A touch of ginger or fish sauce gave the broth depth, turning a pot of water and scraps into a meal that felt complete. This dish reflected the plantation life perfectly: humble, practical, and shared. Families would pool what they had. One worker brought fish from a nearby stream, another added vegetables from a small garden plot, and soon the whole camp had enough to enjoy together. The soup wasn't heavy, but it kept workers going. It was easy to stretch, easy to prepare, and always comforting. Sitting around the table, sipping the hot broth with rice on the side, gave everyone a sense of home in a place that often felt far from it. In its simplicity, fish and vegetable soup carried both survival and togetherness. 12. Stewed pork belly with vinegar and garlic. When pork belly made its way into the plantation camps, it was usually the cheaper, fatty cut. But in Filipino kitchens, that was no problem. It was a blessing. Stewed pork belly with vinegar and garlic turned tough, humble meat into something rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. The process was simple but genius. Pork belly simmered slowly in vinegar, garlic, soy, and pepper until tender, the fat melting into the sauce. The vinegar preserved the meat, while the garlic gave it that sharp, irresistible aroma. Ladled over a mound of rice, it was both hearty fuel and comfort after 12 hours in the cane fields. What made this dish special was how it transformed scraps into treasure. Workers gathered around the table, dipping into the glossy sauce, savoring every bite of meat and fat. It was proof that flavor didn't depend on money. It depended on skill, patience, and the power of tradition carried across the ocean. Even today, its tangy, sweet aroma still drifts from island kitchens, linking modern meals to the resilience and resourcefulness of those early Filipino cooks. 13. Rice with stir-fried greens. On the plantations, meat was a luxury, but greens were life. Rice with stir-fried greens, often morning glory, long beans, or whatever vegetables could be grown in small garden plots, was a daily staple for many Filipino families. Quick to cook, cheap to gather, and full of flavor when seasoned with garlic or fish sauce, it turned a modest bowl of rice into a satisfying meal. After long days in the cane fields, workers tended small patches of vegetables near their camps. These gardens weren't just food, they were survival. A handful of greens thrown into a hot pan with oil and garlic filled the air with a smell that pulled neighbors to the table. For many, this simple dish brought comfort. It wasn't about richness or meat, but about freshness and familiarity. With every bite of crisp greens and warm rice, Filipinos tasted both resilience and memory, proof that even the humblest food could feel like home. Today, those same garden-grown flavors still appear on Hawaiian tables, carrying forward a tradition of thrift and togetherness. 14. Steamed rice cakes with coconut and banana. Not every plantation meal was heavy. Sometimes workers treated themselves to something light and sweet, like steamed rice cakes with coconut and banana. Made from ground rice, mashed banana, and grated coconut, these little cakes were steamed in metal tins or even improvised molds, turning out soft, chewy, and fragrant. They weren't fancy desserts, but they carried joy. Bananas grew easily in Hawaii, and coconuts were plentiful, so workers found ways to stretch these ingredients with rice flour to create snacks that reminded them of home. Children especially loved them, waiting by the steaming pots, eager for the first bite. In the camps, these rice cakes were often shared during gatherings or Sunday rest days. For a moment, the long hours in the fields felt far away, replaced by laughter and sweetness. More than just a treat, they were a taste of tradition, proof that even in hardship, small pleasures could bring people together. 15. Mixed vegetable stew with coconut milk. On the plantations, a pot of mixed vegetable stew with coconut milk was like a hug in a bowl. Squash, eggplant, beans, or leafy greens were simmered slowly in rich coconut milk, seasoned with garlic, onion, and a touch of bagoong or fish sauce. Creamy, savory, and deeply comforting, it turned simple vegetables into something hearty and satisfying. Coconuts were abundant in Hawaii, and Filipino workers quickly leaned on them as a key ingredient. The coconut milk stretched vegetables into a full meal, perfect to ladle over rice and share with a crowd. Even when meat was scarce, the stew felt complete, rich enough to fill the stomach and flavorful enough to soothe the soul. In the camps, families often cooked large pots of this dish, neighbors stopping by with bowls to share. The aroma of coconut and garlic drifting through the air reminded workers of familiar meals back in the Philippines, offering both comfort and community at the end of a long day. 16. Coconut fish stew. Few dishes captured the flavors of home like coconut fish stew. On the plantations, small fish, often mackerel or whatever was cheapest at the market, were simmered gently in coconut milk with ginger, garlic, and sometimes chili for heat. The result was a creamy, savory stew that clung to rice and warmed tired workers after endless hours in the cane fields. Coconuts were plentiful in Hawaii, and Filipino workers used them the same way they did back home. The rich milk softened the strong taste of fish, stretching it into a dish that could feed a whole family. Even when meat was scarce, this stew delivered both protein and comfort. Shared in camp kitchens, the smell of coconut mingling with garlic and fish drew everyone in. For many workers, this dish was more than nourishment. It was memory, a reminder of seaside meals in the Philippines. In every spoonful, they found both survival and a connection to the shores they left behind. 17. Bagoong fried rice. When food was scarce, flavor mattered more than ever, and nothing packed a punch like bagoong fried rice. Leftover rice was tossed in a hot pan with garlic, onions, and bagoong, that pungent, salty, fermented fish paste. Sometimes bits of egg, pork, or vegetables were added if they were around, but the bagoong alone transformed plain rice into a bold, satisfying meal. In the plantation camps, bagoong was a taste of home. Its smell was strong, even shocking to outsiders, but to Filipinos it meant comfort. A spoonful of bagoong could stretch rice into something filling, making sure no one went hungry. Workers often fried big batches to share, each bite salty, savory, and unforgettable. For many, this dish carried pride. It showed how workers could take the humblest leftovers and, with a spoonful of fermented magic, create something delicious. On Hawaii's plantations, bagoong fried rice wasn't just food. It was proof of resilience, identity, and the power of flavor to keep traditions alive. 18. Pancit. Whenever the camps needed a dish that fed many mouths, pancit was the answer. Long noodles stir-fried with garlic, onions, soy, and whatever vegetables were on hand, cabbage, beans, carrots, sometimes with bits of pork or chicken if luck allowed. It was colorful, hearty, and perfect for stretching a few ingredients into a feast. For Filipinos on the plantations, pancit carried a deep meaning. Noodles symbolized long life, so serving pancit wasn't just about eating, it was about hope. On birthdays, holidays, or payday gatherings, you'd see workers gathered around pans sizzling with noodles, the air filled with savory aroma. Kids loved it, adults cherished it, and neighbors always seemed to show up when pancit was being cooked. More than just fuel, it was celebration food in the middle of hardship. With every bite, Filipinos tasted both survival and joy, and pancit became one of those dishes that never left Hawaii, living on in kitchens across the islands. 19. Rice with pork, scraps boiled in vinegar and soy. On the plantations, meat was precious, so nothing ever went to waste. Even pork scraps, bones, and fatty trimmings were treasured, boiled down in vinegar, soy, garlic, and pepper until tender. Served over steaming rice, this humble dish gave workers a taste of adobo's familiar tang without the cost of prime cuts. It was food born from necessity. Plantation stores often sold cheaper cuts to laborers, but Filipinos knew how to turn scraps into something flavorful. The vinegar not only added taste, but also preserved the meat, making it safe to eat even in the humid camps. The rich, salty sour sauce soaked into rice, ensuring every grain carried flavor. Gathered around a single pot, families made the most of what little they had. For many, this dish symbolized resilience, the ability to transform hardship into nourishment. What looked like leftovers to others became a hearty meal, one that filled both stomachs and spirits after another long day in the cane fields. 20. Rice with shellfish or clam stew in tomato base. Along the Hawaiian shores, workers often gathered what the ocean freely gave: clams, mussels, or small shellfish. On the plantations, these finds turned into hearty stews simmered in tomato, garlic, and onions, then poured generously over rice. The briny taste of the sea mixed with the tangy tomato base made each bite bold, comforting, and unforgettable. This dish showed the creativity of Filipino workers. With little money for meat, they relied on what they could forage. A bucket of clams from the beach could feed an entire family once stretched with rice and tomatoes. Sometimes vegetables from a camp garden were tossed in, making the stew even more filling. For many, the smell of clams simmering with garlic brought back memories of fishing villages in the Philippines. On Sundays or rest days, this stew turned into a communal meal, shared with neighbors over laughter and stories. It was survival, yes, but also a taste of home carried across the ocean. 21. boiled taro or yam and rice with fish or pork bits. Before rice was always available, plantation workers often turned to taro or yam, crops that thrived in Hawaii's soil. Boiled until soft and starchy, these roots became the backbone of a simple but sustaining meal. Paired with small bits of salted fish or leftover pork, and always eaten with rice when possible, it was a dish that kept bodies strong through the grind of fieldwork. This was survival food at its purest. Taro and yams were cheap, filling, and grew locally, making them reliable when wages were thin or rice ran short. Workers mashed them alongside rice for extra bulk or ate them plain with a sprinkle of salt and fish flakes. Yet even in its simplicity, the dish carried comfort. For many Filipinos, taro reminded them of gabi back home, while sweet yam echoed flavors of familiar countryside meals. In Hawaii, these roots became a bridge, blending local abundance with Filipino ingenuity to create sustenance from the land itself. 22. Pork and vegetable stir. On the plantations, cooks often had to stretch meat as far as possible, and that's where the pork and vegetable stir came in. Imagine small pieces of pork simmered quickly with garlic, soy, and vinegar, then tossed with vegetables like beans, cabbage, or squash. It was adobo at heart, but lighter, fresher, and easier to make when meat was scarce. This dish showed the creativity born from necessity. A handful of pork scraps flavored an entire pot once vegetables were added. The vinegar gave it that tangy kick, while the soy deepened the flavor. Served over rice, it was filling enough to feed families after grueling shifts in the cane fields. Workers loved it because it tasted like adobo, the Philippines' signature dish, but also carried the freshness of the plantation gardens. Each bite balanced savory, sour, and crisp textures, turning humble ingredients into something worth gathering around. It was proof that even in hardship, flavor never had to be sacrificed. 23. Stewed chicken with ginger or onion. Chicken was a rare treat on the plantations, but when a bird was butchered, nothing went to waste. One of the most beloved ways to prepare it was a simple stew with ginger or onion. Chopped chicken simmered slowly with sliced onions or fresh ginger created a broth that was light yet deeply flavorful, perfect for pouring over rice. This dish carried both strength and comfort. Ginger was known as medicine, warming the body and soothing tired muscles after endless hours in the fields. Onion added sweetness and depth, stretching a small amount of chicken into a pot big enough to share. For workers, it wasn't just food, it was healing in a bowl. Families gathered around, dipping rice into the savory broth, savoring every tender piece of chicken. In its simplicity, this stew reminded Filipinos of the nurturing meals of home. On Hawaiian soil, it became one more way food carried both memory and survival across the Pacific. 24. Mixed bean and bean sprout stir. Protein was often hard to come by on the plantations, so Filipino workers turned to beans, cheap, filling, and easy to store. A simple stir-fry of mixed beans and bean sprouts became a go-to dish, cooked quickly with garlic, onions, and sometimes a splash of soy or fish sauce. It was fast, nourishing, and stretched to feed a whole family. Bean sprouts, grown easily from mung beans, added freshness and crunch to the plate. Workers often sprouted them in jars right inside camp kitchens, ensuring there was always something green to throw into the pan. When mixed with beans, the dish provided enough energy to push through long days of labor. This humble stir-fry reflected both thrift and ingenuity. It didn't need meat, yet it satisfied, especially when eaten alongside rice. For plantation families, it was proof that even the smallest ingredients, sprouts grown in a jar, beans bought cheap, could be transformed into a meal that fueled both body and spirit. 25. Rice with coconut milk and small fish. Few meals captured both thrift and flavor like rice with coconut milk and small fish. On the plantations, tiny fish, sometimes dried, sometimes freshly caught, were simmered in creamy coconut milk with garlic, onions, and a pinch of salt. Poured over hot rice, it was rich, savory, and comforting, even when the ingredients were humble. Coconut milk was a gift of the islands, and Filipino workers used it the way their families had back home. It softened the sharpness of dried fish, turning something salty and tough into a stew that tasted full and satisfying. The coconut cream clung to each grain of rice, making even a small serving feel hearty. For many, this dish was more than food, it was memory. It recalled seaside meals in the Philippines, where fish and coconuts were staples of daily life. In Hawaii, it gave weary workers both strength and a sense of home, a reminder that tradition could survive even the hardest days. When you look back at these 25 Filipino plantation foods, you realize they were never just meals. They were survival after backbreaking work. They were connection in a foreign land. They were memory of fiestas, family, and the Philippines, carried across an ocean and replanted in Hawaiian soil. From humble rice with vegetables to celebratory lumpia, every dish told a story of resilience. These workers had little, yet they created food that fed not only their bodies but also their spirit. And here's the hidden truth. Many of these meals didn't disappear with time. They became part of Hawaii itself, woven into the island's food culture you can still taste today. Even now, their flavors show up at backyard luau's and local plate lunch counters, quietly keeping those stories alive. Each bite is a living link between the islands and the homeland that inspired them.